All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and begin the luncheon presentation, focusing on the Campus Climate Task Force report. How many of you had a good session this morning? Show by raising hands. You had a great session this morning? Fantastic, fantastic. I do want to take this time to acknowledge my staff and team members who helped put on this event for today. So special shout out to Ms. Tracy Gatos, Mary Carlee, Val Davis, members of our comms team and our central staff in the division, and other staff members who work with the programs. They're the ones who are working tirelessly behind the scenes to help pull this event off for you. So please give them a warm round of applause. Yeah. So welcome again to the Diversity Forum, and please continue to enjoy your lunch while we sort of walk you through the Campus Climate Survey Task Report. Over the last 2 years, the university has launched a number of new programs addressing campus climate. I should note that the university has had several programs in the works, but we're focusing primarily over the last 2 years, given the charge from the Ad Hoc Diversity Planning Committee, which was tasked to come up with our strategic diversity framework back in the spring of 2014. And it was that document that paved the way for us to begin a number of the initiatives over the last few years. Our diversity framework serves as our strategic guide on these issues, and one specific action in the framework was to have a campus-wide survey on campus climate. And so today we're here to talk to you about that. The results were just released last week, and this is the first time UW-Madison has surveyed students. All students had the opportunity to take this survey about our campus climate. It's part of our effort to be transparent, data-driven, in our approach and what it means to create a campus where every student feels welcome and able to thrive here at the UW. This task force was comprised of faculty members, staff, and students. They were charged to do a few things. First, review the survey findings, including response rates, sample characteristics, and results, develop a set of recommendations for the chancellor, provost, and myself, and others to address the key findings. They were tasked with also establishing a plan to undertake community engagement activities regarding the survey and the results. And lastly, but not least, wanted to find a way to communicate the survey findings to our broader campus community, which is one of the first steps we're doing here today. The next step is to, of course, refine the assessment of our current processes and those efforts afoot. While the National Survey for Student Engagement showed that 91% of our majority students report a good experience on campus with a strong sense of Badger pride, that isn't necessarily true for everyone. The Climate Survey Task Force results confirm something that we've kind of known all along, anecdotally, that there are real disparities in how students of different backgrounds and identities experience UW-Madison. Here with me today to present the task force findings are my partner in crime. I say we're sort of our salt and pepper, but it's more like paprika and pepper, but y'all get the reference anyway. Lori Berquam, Dean Berquam, Dean of Student Life, Vice Provost, and analyst from the Academic Planning Institutional Research, Margaret Harrigan. Please give these fantastic folks a round of applause. So we're going to try and quickly move through the survey. Let me ask, how many of you had a chance to actually take a look at the survey or the results? So we want to sort of walk you through, if you haven't had a chance, we want to walk you through some of that information, some of the, again, the highlights of the key findings, and then we'll have about 25 minutes for Q&A for you all to ask questions. I want to remind you that this is one of many information sessions that we'll be holding. So if you didn't quite get your question asked today, feel free to join us on December 4th. I believe it's 6:30. That evening will be at the Multicultural Student Center. That'll be our next follow-up session, and we'll have another session on the evening of December 4th at 11:30 p.m. for second and third shift employees. So that said, I'm going to move us through the PowerPoint. You all may be familiar with our institutional statement on our commitment to diversity. I won't read it to you, but this is something that has, again, helped galvanize and focus our efforts. Too often when it comes to these kinds of works or efforts, it's real easy to try to do everything at once, and so we really wanted to be tailored in our approach and how we went about creating the steps that would help us achieve success here. The thing I'll simply say that the survey was focusing on a couple of things. What key recommendations from the diversity framework, as I shared earlier. Why? Understand our campus's community and experience of campus climate and diversity. The how? Designed our instrument using focus groups and stakeholders to identify key important themes. And then, of course, the goal was to identify next steps as part of the real change implementation plan. So when it comes to methodology, the survey was sent to 41,956 students. We had a 21% response rate, 8,652 students responded, and it was a multiple choice and open-ended questions included. Students who completed the survey were similar to the overall UW-Madison student population and demographics, so that's a key piece. This survey was a representative survey of our student population. Lori,
All right.
this part's for you.
In April of 2017, the Campus Climate Survey Task Force was named. And for a moment, I was just hoping if the members of the task force who are in the room, if you could please raise your hands where you're sitting so that people can see. Thank you. There's people way over on the far corner over here and over here. I want you to please join me in thanking them for the work they did on this task force. The co-chairs were Patrick and myself, and the task force included faculty, staff, and students. Over the course of the summer, between May and October, 14 meetings were held to offer next steps and recommendations. We also worked directly with the survey specialists who were involved in the implementation of the survey and the analysis of the findings. Those folks helped guide the task force through the massive amount of data and review it and really try to make sense of what we learned from our students. After spending several weeks reviewing and analyzing the student data, our next step was to identify the major findings. And through those findings, identify the themes that would lead us to recommendations. The task force's charge was to review the findings, including the response rates, the sample characteristics, and the results, to develop a set of recommendations to address the key findings that were identified, to plan and undertake community engagement activities regarding the survey results and the recommendations, and then to create a comprehensive plan for communicating the survey findings and recommendations to our campus community. What the task force was not supposed to do, we were not supposed to get into the weeds and identify, oh, the School of Human Ecology should do X, or the College of Ag and Life Sciences should do Y, or the Division of Student Life should do A. So it's a broad sense of recommendations, and we'll get into those in just a little bit.
I'm going to highlight some of the key findings from the task force report. The diversity framework defined diversity broadly, acknowledging many aspects of a person's identity. Therefore, the survey collected information about many student characteristics, including whether they were an undergraduate or a graduate student, their gender and gender identity, race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, whether they have a disability, religion, socioeconomic background, political views. Our analysis looked at the data for students in each of these categories since we wanted to know whether students from different backgrounds experience campus life differently. What did we find? Most students from all backgrounds report a positive campus climate. However, across many measures on the survey, students from historically underrepresented and disadvantaged groups report a less positive climate. In particular, there was a consistent pattern reflecting a less positive climate for students of color, transgender non-binary students, LGBTQ students, and students with a disability. Among students of color, Black or African American students were least likely to report a positive climate. The survey asked, thinking about this semester on campus, how often do you feel safe, welcome, respected, like you belong? And about 80% of our students overall say they feel welcome, safe, and respected very or extremely often. About 69% of the students say they feel like they belong very or extremely often. However, as we noted earlier, not all the students report the same experience. While 81% of students overall feel welcome on campus, only half of transgender non-binary students and only about 2/3 of students of color, LGBTQ students, and students with a disability reported they often feel welcome. Similarly, 69% of students overall feel as though they belong on campus, but this feeling is shared by only 35% of transgender students, 51% of LGBTQ students, 50% of students of color, and 56% of students with a disability. An important component of campus climate is the extent to which the classroom environment is welcoming and inclusive. The survey included a question on how much do you feel your comments and questions are respected in your classes. About 4 out of 5 students feel their instructors respect their comments and questions in class. Students of color and LGBTQ students are similar to majority students in this regard. However, transgender students and students with a disability are less likely to feel their comments and questions are respected by faculty or instructors in class. Although 79% of students feel their comments are respected by their instructors, only 65% of students feel that their comments and questions are very or extremely respected by other students in class. 50% of the trans students, 56% of LGBTQ students, 54% of students of color, and 55% of students with a disability feel their comments and questions are respected in class by other students. Students were also asked, this semester, have you ever felt expected to represent the point of view of your identity in your classes? Your race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, socioeconomic status, or country of origin. Over 1/4 of students report they feel expected to represent the point of view of their identity in class. Students of color, transgender students, students with a disability, LGBTQ students, and international students are more likely to feel expected to represent their identity. Students who told us they were expected to represent their identity were asked how they feel about it. Overall, about 40% of students said they feel slightly negative or somewhat negative or extremely negative. However, not all groups feel it's a negative experience. Although 2/3 of the transgender students and over half of the LGBTQ students, students of color, and students with a disability do not like being called on to represent their identity in class, 50% of international students view it as a positive opportunity. Only 16% of them viewed it negatively. The survey asked students to tell us about incidents of hostile, harassing, or intimidating behavior they had personally witnessed or personally experienced while a student at UW-Madison. Nearly 1 in 3 students, about 31%, reported an incident on the survey. Most of the incidents students described were ones that they witnessed, but 11% of students reported incidents directed at them personally. About half of transgender students, half of students with a disability, and over 40% of students of color and LGBTQ students report witnessing or experiencing hostile, harassing, or intimidating behavior. About 1 in 9, or 11% of students, described an incident that was directed at them personally. 1/3 of transgender, non-binary students, and over 1/4 of students with a disability, and about 20% of LGBTQ and students of color reported an incident directed at them personally. The survey also contained questions about how students view the university's commitment to diversity, asking, how committed is UW-Madison to diversity, and how important is it to you that UW-Madison has a strong commitment to diversity? Nearly 3 out of 4 students say it is very or extremely important to them that UW-Madison has a strong commitment to diversity. Half of students view UW as very or extremely committed to diversity, while 1/3 say UW-Madison is somewhat committed. Students from traditionally underrepresented groups were less likely to view UW-Madison as very committed to diversity and rated the importance of the university's commitment more highly than majority students. So 21% of trans students, 36% of LGBTQ, 33% of students of color, and 38% of students with a disability view the university as very or extremely committed to diversity. Students were asked, how important is valuing diversity to one's future success, and how often do you try to create a welcoming environment for other students here at UW-Madison? About 4 out of 5 students indicated that valuing diversity is very or extremely important, And similarly, about 80% of students stated that they very often or extremely often try to create a welcoming environment for other students here at UW-Madison. I mentioned earlier that we examined the climate data by several other student characteristics, including socioeconomic status, religion, and political views. These characteristics didn't have the same pattern of results, but there were some differences that we observed. First generation, international, transfer, Muslim, and Buddhist students, and students from a working class background reported a less positive campus climate on some measures. They were less likely to feel welcome and less likely to feel like they belong. In contrast, Jewish students, Hindu students, and Christian students were as likely as other students to say that they feel welcome and respected. White and politically conservative students were more likely than other students to feel respected, welcome, and like they belong.
We also asked a qualitative question on the survey. And on the slide, you'll see some of the student suggestions and how we can improve our campus climate. They include to provide more training and education related to diversity and inclusion, hold more events and activities that increase the connection between different groups of students, improve institutional response to bias and hateful incidents, increase diversity of students, faculty, and staff, and increase resources and support systems and accommodations for our students. I would like to indicate here that I think most of our recommendations actually follow directly from some of the qualitative results and qualitative suggestions that our students made to us. And much of the information, as Patrick indicated, isn't new news to us. Last night I attended an event with students in the open house, a residential learning community. And one of the things the students said to me was, well, great, now we know water is wet. And I think that's a really telling statement because we didn't learn anything new, but what we learned reinforced what we've been hearing from our students. And I think that's an important point to make at this point in where we are with the survey. The survey task force worked hard on the recommendations, and they include to ensure inclusive learning communities or inclusive learning environments, to increase our campus safety for all members of the UW-Madison community, to improve institutional responses to incidents of hate and bias, and that we can promptly communicate a clear commitment to diversity and inclusivity when those incidents happen. To increase the number of faculty, staff, and students from underrepresented groups, to promote our shared value of diversity and inclusion, to increase the capacity of students, faculty, and staff to respond effectively to hostile, harassing, and intimidating behaviors, and to promote dialogue across differences to emphasize mutual respect and understanding. On your table, if you haven't had the chance to see the overview, there is a one-page overview of the results and the next steps from the task force, and I think this goes into a little bit more detail about the recommendations from the task force.
Great. So we'll focus on next steps, and I think this is, the piece that I think your student probably was speaking about, right? So we know water is wet. So now what are we going to do? During one of the sessions, one of the speakers talked about a certain amount of ownership and responsibility that each and every one of us has as a member of this community. That it's got to be more than just showing up one day of the year or having this experience, that you actually need to do something to take it back to your respective community or sphere of influence to build on what we're trying to accomplish with respect to our campus climate. So of course, first and foremost, we're hoping to refine the assessment processes of our current efforts. As I shared before, Madison has a lot of things that we should be proud of, demonstrating our commitment to diversity and inclusion. And I've often said, while we may not always have the answers, we haven't given up. You know, that's that Badger spirit and pride that helps us still stay vigilant in the discovery and the fight to make sure that we create that space that every student feels welcome, supported, and a sense of belonging here. And that extends not just to students, but faculty and staff. We certainly want to encourage broad participation in the Diversity Inventory Project. That too is an effort that has been in the works for the better part of 2 years now to actually get a handle on what we're doing writ large for the institution. It's a massive undertaking, so I want to acknowledge the hard work of Dr. Trishika Maddox and Tina Madison, who are team members, who are stewarding that process for us. And then, of course, we want to make sure that the resource is aligned with our current and future efforts. It's one of those kinds of things that there's not a whole lot of new money coming in. If you look at the environment that we're in right now, the Chancellor has made it very clear that our respective budget processes, this is a great budget, the fact that we didn't have any cuts this year. So that gives you a sense of the context of how we're hoping to refine our processes by being better stewards of what we've already had and been given. Key campus initiatives that are already underway that reflect some of these activities for us. You all may have heard about the Our Wisconsin program. It was a pilot project that we launched last year. Only 1,000 students participated, but this year we expanded it to all incoming students. Nearly 7,000 students participated. There's a session later on, right? Later on today. The Discussion Project. This is an effort in the School of Education led by some of the research and scholarship of Dean Diana Hess. Right? It begins this fall to help faculty and academic staff and members facilitate high-quality classroom discussions around what I refer to as sensitive subject matters, or those thorny topics that you engage everyone in the process for us. Our Badger Promise. The Chancellor made mention of an effort to help first-generation Wisconsin students afford a UW-Madison education to the extent that they meet certain criteria, are meeting the economic threshold if they start at Madison College or any of the other two-year campuses. If they maintain a certain GPA threshold and academic profile, they can automatically be admitted to the UW, and they will receive a full year worth of tuition. And to the extent that they demonstrate additional financial need and they're Pell eligible, they can receive up to another year of tuition. It's worth noting that the bias response and advocacy effort that's been under the purview of Dean Lori Burkham's shop, she's hired a full-time coordinator to manage those processes, to deal with those reports. And so this is something that we recognize we needed, I want to say almost 3 or 4 years ago, and it's taken time to build the infrastructure so we can adequately capture and reflect the kinds of things that are happening. So we take these comments and these reports seriously. I should note that, as I said earlier, if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to join the conversation, to continue the dialogue. We have a session at the Multicultural Student Center on December 4th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. This is a forum that we're focusing primarily on students, but it's open to everyone. We want them to be able to share their thoughts. We want to hear more about the survey and weigh in with questions and thoughts on the next steps. And as I shared earlier, the Diversity Forum for our second and third shift employees, December 4th, 2017 at 11:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. in Gordon Commons. So we encourage you to participate or have your colleagues or other staff members who couldn't be with us today to participate in that session as well. There'll also be 2 sessions in the spring semester. Early spring, those dates are to be determined, but we, again, expect to be able to roll out and engage in more intimate settings and dialogues around what the report is revealing to us. And again, be clear what those next steps are, because as the Chief Diversity Officer, I feel a certain amount of responsibility. That said, I'm very aware that I cannot do this work alone. Dean Berkwam, the Chancellor Provost, we can't do it by ourselves. We need all hands on deck. This is a collaborative effort. We didn't get in this situation overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. So we need everyone to really look deep within and question themselves, and to the extent you ask, well, what can I do? What steps can I take? That's just the first step. That's the tip of the iceberg in terms of identifying quality experiences and or programs or resources to keep the conversation alive and actually move the needle. We'll certainly be reaching out to all of our shared governance partners, University Staff Congress, Faculty Senate, Academic Staff Assembly, and of course ASM, our Associated Students of Madison. So I will pause here, and I think we're right at time. We got about 20 minutes remaining for questions. Again, if you're interested in asking a question, we ask that you would please join and come to the microphones. The way to make sure the microphone is on, there's a green light that says on. It's right above the on button, so push the button towards on. If you have a question, feel free to ask. Thank you so much. Okay, we're done. Thank you. No, seriously, if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Hello. Hi.
Thanks for running up here.
I'm out of breath now. Okay, so hello, thank you for going through this. My main question has to do with the Board of Regents resolution. It's entitled The Commitment to Academic Freedom and Freedom of Expression. For those of you that don't know what this is, you should look into it. It's kind of dangerous, in my opinion, and I guess I want to know kind of how you all are getting involved with the response to what the Board of Regents has proposed to the State Senate, and maybe what UW-Madison can do on the forefront of this in responding, because the nation is looking toward us at this point in time, and how this proceeds will impact a lot of people, and I think will continue to make the climate of our campus not so welcoming. So it'll be kind of moving backwards from what the survey is hoping to do. So I guess if you could just speak to that, that would be really awesome.
Thank you for that question, and it's a very critical question, and it's a very critical issue that our chancellor was very outspoken in opposition to with the Regents. It is a UW system policy, and I can tell you that my office right now is working on the definitions of disruption and working with UW system to figure out what did they mean when that was put into place. We are going to be responsible for upholding that particular policy, and I believe very strongly that working together with students, we can put in place and manage the issues that I think that policy is trying to address and the concerns that were being articulated there. And at this point, it's still in process, and we have gotten very little guidance from UW system on that particular policy.
I'll simply add, and Lori mentioned this earlier, the notion of disruption, what does that mean? That's the essence. Because in a space like this, if someone wanted to stand on the side, hold up signs in silent protest, you had a bunch of folk, is that disruption? Does it matter if they stand in front of the podium where we are? You can't see us, but you can still hear, you can still see the monitors. Is that disruption? So the definition of what disruption is going to be tested, quite frankly, and I think we'll see people on both sides of the issue wanting to test and help define or narrow what that definition will look like based on their interpretation or particular leanings for that. So by no means is this a settled issue for us, because there's still a lot of work that has to be done. And as Lori mentioned, having students be intimately involved in that conversation with us, and to the extent we get engagement through our faculty senate and all the rest of our governance groups, that's an example of how we unite and begin to change the climate together. So that's what I'll add there. I have a question here.
Hi, thank you. I do have a question about one of the recommendations, number 5, is to promote our shared value of diversity and inclusion, and it says to encourage broad-based campus involvement in the work of equity and inclusion, and I'm happy to see that. One of the things that I and many colleagues of mine have wondered, I'm a staff person who also was a graduate student here, so kind of many hats experience, but one of the things I'm wondering is we do seem to have, at least where I'm at, trainings that are beginning to be required now for students, which I think is really great, around unconscious bias or diversity and inclusion. I'm not seeing that with faculty and staff, so I guess I'm specifically wondering what kinds of things can we do to encourage that among faculty and staff for example, one of the things I'm thinking about is, admissions policies and things that those are generally decided by faculty. So how can we make sure that everyone is learning about this kind of thing?
Well, thank you for that question. So if I could paraphrase, one, to see how are we creating spaces that ensure engagement across the many constituents of our campus, yes? So a couple of things. So my office, again, we play a small role in this. We see ourselves as thought partners. So a new effort that we're ready to launch is a project called a Diversity Liaison project, which is identifying faculty members or instructional staff in departments who have a vested interest in helping other academic units or administrative units think more intentionally about how to either refine their curriculum, to more intentionally engage issues of diversity and inclusion, to think about the climate within the respective unit and or department, to really have a sounding board or a space to ask the quote-unquote silly or dumb questions. We have had for several years now a unit under my supervision, the Learning Community for Institutional Change and Excellence, also known as LSICE. There are something called the Leadership Institute, Leadership at Lunch. There are several spaces where staff can participate. If I'm sensing your question, this is the degree to which we can insist or require folks to participate, well, that is always, as they say, the devil being in the details. About 2 years ago, I approached the Faculty Senate, and when we first had a series of recommendations or demands, as the students say, where they wanted every faculty member, every staff member, every student on campus to have exposure, competency training around diversity and inclusion issues, that was a tough one for us because it's difficult, quite frankly, to require faculty to do these kinds of things as an extension of their academic freedom. That said, I simply asked the question of the faculty, and I asked them would they commit themselves to engage in these ongoing professional development experiences. And so there are a resolution that passed that year that was also mirrored literally a couple of days later with the Academic Staff Assembly. And in the fall, I believe it was fall of 16, we also saw similar language emerge for our University Staff Congress. So there are spaces where you have a statement, an institutional statement, that sort of anchors, and then you have a more localized approach that gets buy-in for faculty, academic staff, and our university staff, where they create that sense of accountability amongst themselves. Because we're not the diversity police. We'll never be effective in that way. So we're partners, but there has to be a certain amount of ownership of this process at the local level and responsibility to take it to the next step. So, there.
I just will add to that the expectation of our chancellor to all of the academic deans and all of the directors across campus is to be able to offer diversity and inclusivity programs, events tailored to their specific school, college, or department. And this year she asked for us to build on that from what we've done previously. So what I hear in that is a commitment, an institutional commitment to how do we do this in a way that makes sense for people in their respective positions. And having been a part of the most recently released expectation where all staff and faculty will take sexual violence, sexual harassment training, maybe there's hope.
Question?
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Thielman-Fenellis. I'm a senior here at UW. So I think that in theory, the recommendations put forward by the task force are great, but like many of the previous initiatives produced by the institution, these recommendations are intangible, unmeasurable, and vague. Moving forward, how does the institution plan on measuring success as it relates to these recommendations, and how will the university hold itself accountable if these recommendations are not met?
Well, that, Gabby, is the million-dollar question, right? How do we create spaces of accountability? And this is one of the things that we wrestled with on the committee, quite frankly, because we kind of got ahead of ourselves. So knowing that people will want to see, hey, so what exactly are you going to do? Well, one of the first things we were clear with doing this survey was to establish a baseline. So we now have that baseline. That's important because without the baseline, you're doing a lot of activity and you really don't have anything to gauge or compare. So as small a victory as it is, it's an important victory for us. That said, we were asking the committee to really do things that were above and beyond the charge. Really, the devil's going to be in the details in how we focus on the implementation processes. We have a plan in place, our real change implementation document. This was, again, a sort of surrogate effort to our diversity framework effort in 2014. So that document is guiding our activities for the next decade through 2024. So there are a number of initiatives in that document, 18 to be exact, but they don't cover the full spectrum of some of the things that we saw emerge in the survey. And so my team, along with many of our shared governance groups that we interface with, the Campus Climate Diversity Committee, our MDs, our Minority Disadvantage Coordinators, our EDCs, our Equity and Diversity Committees for each school and college. Those are the spaces that I hope to be able to activate to help us drill down and identify here's what needs to happen at the local level. Because again, it has to be a localized effort. It can't just be a top-down effort. It has to be a partnership. So things have to emerge, and also things, and the tone needs to be set from the top. And I think this is something that the Chancellor's committed to, and certainly we're pushing that envelope as much as we can too.
I think you covered it. Thank you. Gabby, did you have another question?
I don't really think you answered my question. I think that it was like a very beautiful statement, but I think that you kind of like went around the point instead of actually coming up with tangible things that the institution will do to make these changes happen.
So let me rephrase then. What you're asking for, I'm not able to give you at this time.
Okay.
That has to be a result of collaboration with many of the respective units that are in place. So, for example, as I shared earlier, the Diversity Liaison project, this is a pilot project that we're launching, and we're trying to identify 5 individuals per year to develop a cadre, a resource of about 20 individuals in 5 years that will be able to create some of the concrete things that you're looking for. I certainly have some ideas, but I can't wave a magic wand and say, everybody do what I think should happen, because there are things out there that I may be missing depending on the respective unit that information would be useful in terms of developing a plan. So while I can't give you the specifics, I'm trying to lay out the framework or process to get to those specifics. And it's one of those things where I describe it sort of as part art, part science. We have the baseline, and that in and of itself is a victory that I'm wanting to sort of relish for a little bit to begin to move the needle to say, hey, now we know where we are, here's where we want to go. So what goals can we set? I can tell you that in the School of Nursing, for example, Dean Linda Scott has a very aggressive and robust campaign and strategy in place to get many of the staff and faculty thinking more intentionally about engaging diversity in their curriculum, because from her vantage point, it literally is life and death. It is affecting the nature of the discipline and how they deliver the service. So those details, while I don't know this, we're having those broader conversations. The results will show in how they begin to revamp and refine their curriculum. So that's one concrete step that I can offer.
Thanks for persevering to get our answers. I really appreciate that. And one thing that I would add to what Patrick has said is my hope or my dream for these recommendations, and I dare say the dream of the task force as we work to finalize these, is that these will live everywhere. In each school and college, each director will have this list of recommendations, and then I'm hoping you will help us, okay, how are we doing this in the Division of Student Life? How are we doing this in the Division of University Housing? How are we doing this in the College of Letters and Sciences? And as members of those communities, my hope is that you'll continue to raise that so that we're doing it together. And I think therein lies buy-in. Of course, anytime you just tell somebody to do something, it's not necessarily met with open arms, i.e. the previous question about the academic freedom policy that was bestowed upon us by the Board of Regents. But I do think if people are a part of building it, if people have a voice in creating how we address these recommendations, we will be better as a campus, and our students will see it live in all of us. And it isn't one person or one group of people that are doing it, but it's all of us. And that's what I think our students deserve.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm a grad student, and I'm also work with TAA, the Graduate Student Union, on diversity issues. And my question is about the 4th recommendation. I know that like a lot of departments have struggled to get to increase their number of grad students of color, in part because there are so few faculty of color. And I'd like to ask what specifically is going to be done to increase the number of faculty, staff, and students from underrepresented groups? Like specifics, details, like what exactly you folks have in mind?
Well, we have a couple of initiatives. So one, there's the Faculty Diversification Initiative, which has been around for a while. And this is a resource that's made available for units who want to expand the pool of applicants for any open positions. And to the extent that they identify candidates who are of underrepresented backgrounds or bring an underrepresented perspective to the scholarship and research, there's bridge funding that we're putting in place for 3 years to support that unit to bring that faculty member on board. With respect to other faculty efforts, we're relaunching something called the Cluster Hire Initiative, which is focusing on discipline-specific approaches and new points of discovery in research and scholarship. And to the extent we identify people who have those interests, we hope that there is some overlap in the degree to which we attract more diverse applicants to apply for those positions. So those are 2 efforts. With respect to staff, we know that there are efforts that we certainly want to add more to, and I think that's a challenge because when you compare the numbers of our faculty, just over 2,000, to the numbers of our staff members, in total about 20,000, how you take something like that to scale is a bit more complex and complicated, and so I don't want to give any misinformation because I'm not directly involved in those efforts. But I will say, generally speaking, part of what I think the Chancellor is focusing on is recognizing that we're in competition, right? And given the success that Madison has had, we in some ways are a victim of our own success because we know that Madison is, for many folk, a destination. But there are other emerging institutions of high prominence and equally profound and prolific in their work in scholarship and research that we have to compete with. And so those efforts are important to us. And so as we try to build out those partnerships, we recognize we have to up the game in terms of being able to recruit and attract those students or staff members as well. We are right at time, so I'm going to hand it off to Lori.
Sorry, I'm taking it away. I know that's really unlike me. The other thing I just want to say, and I appreciate that question, is it's not just to get students of color here or staff and faculty of color, it's how do we retain them? And that has to be a part of what all of us do as well. And that's it's a big lift. But one thing, challenge yourself. I'll challenge myself. Who's in your social circle? Because in order for us to keep this institution strong, to have exactly what was asked for by the previous speaker, to address what the students brought up, we have to retain our staff and faculty and students of color. And that's crucial. And that takes, again, all of us. Sorry, I know that sounds like a band, like I've been beating the band on that, and I know now you want this back.
Well, so just one housekeeping item for us. On the tables, you have a copy of the survey. So if you haven't had a chance to complete the survey, please do so for us. This conversation is a complex one, and there's never enough time, and so I'm really committed to making sure that we create spaces for folks to ask the key questions. So again, I encourage you, if you didn't get a chance to ask your question today, please join us on December 4th or some of the other sessions that are forthcoming. We really want to make sure that folks hear and understand what the context is and also recognize the progress that we're making, and albeit incremental, it is still progress nonetheless. And so I say thank you so much for joining us today, for being a part of this conversation. And like Lori, I'll issue you a challenge. Think about your sphere of influence and how you can personally change someone's life and lived experience being a member of this community. Thank you.